Mame fa na se ma PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV de osia dem yopo.
Kwesi Pratt Junior and Samuel Abujina Pawde and Sembia Tuja. Now, among some na ministry veteran echoes for parliamentary and I'm so ama ebimo SS microphones, tables, then yakeka. Now, after say OSP declared King Ofori-Atta wanted that Richard Japa and so a leading military mind for Emomoko ni fear Omonhuna. Mahama Ayaragan so Aquaco apologized to King Ofori-Atta and so Omadi and Sembi Tuja Omokasafa and some who will be coming home. Na Kwesi Pratt Junior and Samuel Abujina Paul Tuja. A person of Jebre na wakame 19 or 17 in Chilimu. Na answer never gonna subscribe to channel like na share jumadi no man afofro ensa enkabi. Yenti ensema Kwesi Pratt Junior and Samuel Abujina Paul Tuja.
So the processes of vetting of ministers, you saw it all. The allegation that chairs were broken and so on, all of that. What is your comment?
Well, first of all, I think it's unfortunate that happened. I mean, it shouldn't have happened. It seems to be a culture which is creeped into our parliamentary space and practice from the 8th Parliament. I mean, I was in the 8th Parliament and I saw all sort of things happen in that Parliament, you know. Including the speaker's chair being taken away, and
the chewing of ballot papers,
and all of that, you know. Yeah. So a lot of things happen in that parliament, and it seems that it's traveled into this 9th Parliament. As you know, Kwesi, as a general rule and as a general observation, parliamentary rancor is not uncommon. I mean, there have been parliaments where people have thrown chairs at each other and beaten each other to pulp and the rest. But it is not a practice that we should encourage here in Ghana. I think it's and there are parliaments where the level of decency and decorum is quite unmatched. The House of Commons is another example. So we should not. I don't support the creeping of violence, if you want, in the parliament of our country. But I'm not justifying what happened at the Appointments Committee, but it's also important that the majority does not deny the minority their say. The majority, in most cases, because of their numbers, will, in all probabilities, have their way most of the time, if not all of the time. But at all material times, the minority's say should not and indeed be prevented. We should prevent an attempt to stifle the say of the minority and to mute the minority. And I believe that as condemnable as what happened is, there seemed to have been an attempt to compel the minority members on the Appointments Committee to walk out of the proceedings of the Appointments Committee, majority knowing that a walkout by the minority will still put them in a position where they will have quorum to conduct business and therefore be able to take nominees through the vetting processes in a manner that they so wish, which will prevent the minority from having their say, and which I believe is an affront on the dictates of the Constitution, and that and by that I refer to the requirement of the Constitution for prior approval of Parliament, which requires vetting and then prior approval of Parliament. So that's how I will come to this matter.
Are you comfortable with the vetting process itself? I mean, a minister was being vetted and was asked to sing his favorite high life song. What kind of vetting is that?
So was the minister vetted and was given a bye-bye?
Yeah, are you satisfied with that kind of?
Well, we can't have a perfect...
The comics.
Yes, indeed. You are right. We can't have a perfect situation. And I think that we have a lot of room for improvement. There's absolutely no two ways about that. If you follow the congressional hearings or vettings of President Trump's nominees. You see that was high pitch. But also in this appointments committee, I believe that some members have held their own. I mean, I've participated in some of the vettings. I recall asking the Minister for Communication, the Honorable Sam George, what his position and what his attitude will be when it comes to artificial intelligence. It's a very important area that we should all be very interested in. So did I ask the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Honorable Blakwa, how he's going to navigate Ghana's foreign policy within the current turbulence in the global geopolitics of multipolar. We don't no longer have bipolar. We now have multipolar. BRICS, European Union, the West, Russia, and all of that. So, of course, the minority leader has been quite extraordinary in literally cross-examining nominees. And so we need to take a critical look at the vetting. I believe in thorough vetting. I think we should vet people thoroughly, and all their views must come on the table, because at the end of the day, even when we pass them, the responses they give to questions at the vetting committee also becomes a basis for which we measure their work. But then, of course, to sing your favorite favorite hymn, and then to bye-bye and all of that, all those things are
highlight song.
Highlight song. Those are excesses that I believe we can sieve out.
Are you happy that the minority has boycotted the sittings of the committee to investigate the violence that occurred?
Well, I think the minority leader is put out the explanation for that, and I believe it's fundamentally premised on the perceived bias or actual bias of the chairman of the committee. Yes.
Now, Honorable, you've been accused of something. It's been said that you asked a member of parliament, or described a member of parliament as the daughter of a murderer. Is that true? I mean, we are referring to the Honorable Zanato Rollins.
Well, first of all, it's not true. It's totally false. And second of all, it's something that is giving me considerable headache. And I've been quite devastated since that allegation was made. And the day in question in Parliament, I did not even hear those words being spoken to begin with. My attention was drawn to it the following day when this false claim was made that I described my very good friend and sister, Dr. Zanato Rollins, in those terms. Kwesi, you've known me, since my days as a, very little man, and
young man,
young man. That's why I don't want to use young man. I was a young man. I don't want to get into your category. You are an old man. I'm a young man. Because I don't speak like that. I don't speak in that manner. That to begin with. I've never even spoken across the aisle before. Never done that in Parliament. This is my 5th year in Parliament. I don't speak in that manner. And in all modesty, anybody who's followed my career knows that I don't, I don't use that kind of language. Even the thought of it, scares me and frightens me completely. Thirdly, I don't believe in the politics of acrimony and animosity. I'm sure that someone like you and many others will attest to that. I don't believe your political opponent is your enemy and use such unkind words against your political opponent. Some of my good friends are from the other side of the aisle, and I have no difficulty referring to them as my friends. And I believe in bipartisanship. I believe in reducing the heat in our country and building consensus and so on and so forth. Fourthly, when President Rollins was alive, he was somebody who took a great interest in me. As Deputy Chief of Staff, I visited him multiple times. A lot of the discussions.
I've heard that you were actually involved in arranging accommodation for him.
I wouldn't comment on that.
Why would
No, I wouldn't. But I'm saying that I wouldn't.
Because apart from his rich residence, you also arranged accommodation for him at is it West Lagos?
Let's move on. Now, the point I'm making
is that true?
No, the point I'm making. No, it's not. The point I'm making.
You mean you didn't arrange special accommodation for him?
I didn't.
Did the government arrange special accommodation for him?
No comment. No, but the point I'm making is I had very excellent relations with President Rawlings. He liked me a lot.
I know.
And yes, and I visited him multiple times.
That's why I'm asking you this question.
And he told me so many stories. Some of them I'll take to my grave. And the Rawlingses generally have very excellent relations with them. All of them, each one of them. Dr. Zenato in particular, I have great respect for her. We get on very well. And in fact, when President Rawlings passed, the tribute that was read by the then minority leader, Honorable Haruna Idrisu, on the floor of Parliament. This was just about February 2017, February 2021. The Parliament, the first meeting of the first session of Parliament had just commenced, and I was a first timer. And I was nominated by the majority side to contribute to the motion. I was the only person who spoke in support or in contribution to the motion before others joined in, because of the knowledge persons in the majority side knew of the relationship I had with President Rawlings. And you can take a look at what I said about him at the time. So it's one of those things, but this is one of those allegations which has really devastated me completely. Because to suggest that...
What are you going to do about it? Because there are people who have sworn in the media that it was you.
Well, this is the nature of our politics, Kwesi. This is the nature of our politics, and we all have to do something about it. I have heard some very ridiculous, outlandish allegations being leveled against me, and not even far from the truth. I mean, nothing to do with the truth. But the sad part is that people believe it. People believe it. You have someone takes a video and that's what they call TikTok, and says all kinds of things, and you have 1,000 comments, and people believe it. So the issue of misinformation, disinformation, and untruths in social media circles, and even mainstream media, people don't check anything, and so on. But I'm happy that I've had a conversation with Dr. Rawlings. But do you know the New Patriotic Party better than I do? Yeah, you answer that question.
I wasn't that confident that you were winning the election.
Of
So
course.
what happened?
What happened indeed? You know, as you know, because I've been a member of the New Patriotic Party for years. I mean, I've been around the party since the age of 19 or 20 years. I've run through the corridors of the party at different levels up to this stage. 2024 was a bad year for the MPP. It was a very bad year. We first of all, need to accept that. It was a bad year. It does happen. It's happened to the NDC before in 2016. It was a terrible year for them. In the year 2000, it happened to them. It was a terrible year for them. It's not been as bad for a political party as it was for the MPP in 2024, ever in the fourth Republican dispensation. I think it's also a fact that we need to concede, we need to accept that we have had the worst hemorrhage that any political party has ever had in the history of the fourth Republican dispensation. These are two fundamental facts which I believe the party will have to accept, you know. And thirdly, also, is the fact that you will see that it's not scientifically proven yet, politically, or no research is really come to that conclusion yet. The Professor Kwesi committee is still out there working, and we all have to wait for their findings or the outcome of their work. But that said, I think a cursory examination will reveal that a lot of our supporters, or a lot of people who normally will vote for us, or who voted for us in previous elections, just folded their arms and didn't turn out to vote. Why is a matter that we have to dig into.
Is there any empirical evidence for this secession?
Well, that's why I say that we need to wait for the outcome of the research. What is clear, though, is that the turnout for 2024 elections, generally, the turnout for the general elections was the lowest in Ghanaian political history. Was the lowest, and it was the lowest, the worst of that turnout occurred in traditionally MPP strongholds like Ashanti region, Eastern region, and the rest. In my own constituency, Damango, the turnout in 2020 was 89%, the turnout in 2024 was 77%. So that was a downward trend of some, 9%, 10% or so, or more. So turnout was an issue. And if you see the votes President Mahama got and the votes Dr. Bawumia got, you can then unscientifically, as I said, come to some conclusion that these were people who otherwise would have voted for the MPP. But I am not one of those people who believes in dressing your wound and not getting to the root of it, which is why I believe that Professor Okoye's work is important, which is why I believe it's absolutely important that we accept that there were fundamental flaws and we need an introspection as a party. Political parties have been through that before. The Democratic Party under President Reagan, as you know, stayed in opposition for 12 years. The Labour Party in the United Kingdom stayed in opposition from 1979 to 1997 until Tony Blair won the elections for them in 1997. That was some 17 years. Not too long ago, the Labour Party under Corbyn, your good friend, been in opposition for almost 14 years now, and Sir Keir Starmer has brought them back. So we have we have a horse or a vehicle which we need to find a way of resuscitating. There's absolutely no two ways about that. Yeah, so that's all I can say for
Couldn't the economy have been, the state of the economy have been the main reason?
Well, I won't get into the question or the issue of main reason. I'll wait for the report of the Okoye committee. But certainly the economy will play some role. There's absolutely no two ways about that. And it's also not a secret that the Ghanaian economy ran into some difficulties, as many economies across the world did run into difficulties for obvious reasons. Yeah, so that's...
Boakye Ejaku has actually stated that what accounted for this massive defeat was a departure from the core principles of the party.
That sounds like...
That's what he says.
The core values.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't contest that. I will not also accede to that. Let's see what happens. The Okoye committee is carrying out its research and its investigations. Mr. Ajaku is a very senior, respected member of the party. He's entitled to his views. And if he says this is one of the reasons, I think these are all matters that we should examine, we should interrogate.
And there are many members of the party who are also saying that they don't have any confidence in the Okoye committee.
I've heard that too, but I will rather we wait for them to conclude their work. I think the outcome of their work is what will determine whether or not they've justified the confidence reposed in them by the party. But let's also face it, Professor Okoye is a very senior, respected man of integrity, former speaker, former MP, former minister, leading grandee of the party, statesman. I want to believe that he and his members will do a good job for the party.
What is going to happen to leading members of the party, from your point of view, who more or less were driven out or abandoned the party? Can mention names. Nyaho Tamaklo, Paul Afoko, and so on. Many of them, you know them. Well, what would be your prescription in dealing with those people?
I think the party should have an open door policy. And political party work is a game of numbers. And therefore, across the spectrum, and by that I don't want to restrict myself to leading members. I say across the spectrum, from the polling station all the way to national. The party should have an open door policy during the phase of reorganizing the party, where people are welcome with open hands. People who are not so enthusiastic anymore, members who are not so enthusiastic anymore, members who are disgruntled or disenchanted, and so on and so forth. We should have a mechanism of reintegrating all of them into our folds. including members of the NDC who are bound to also get disenchanted and disgruntled. As you know, even in there.
You're expecting that?
Well, it's happening already, even in Parliament today. There were those who were expecting to be ministers, they've not been made ministers. There were those who were expecting to be deputy ministers, they've not been deputy ministers. And those of us who are in the political rumor mill and listening from the grapevine and all of that, we know that already there are people in the NDC who are disillusioned and who are disenchanted. It's part of the business of politics. Not everybody will get the opportunity. And those who don't get sometimes have the tendency to fold their hands. So we should welcome all of them across board.
Specifically, what's your attitude to the suggestion that the party should try and woo back somebody like Mr. Alan Shemati? Specific.
Well, you know, I'm very reluctant to be specific on these matters. I'm very reluctant to be specific on these matters. I believe that the exigencies of the time, political exigencies of the time, calls for tailor-made measures and strategies. The party will definitely have to go through a reorganization phase where we'll hold elections to elect new leaders across the spectrum. And when that is done and we'll sit around the table, it will depend on the exigencies of the time. I wouldn't say yes or no.
Reorganization. All kinds of suggestions appear to be coming up. One is the suggestion that Chairman Wuntumi should become national chairman of the party. There are indications that Eugene Entry, our friend Eugene Entry, wants, or some people want him to become general secretary of the party and so on. How do you see all of this?
Well, I've heard several other names as well. In the case of chairmanship, I think I've heard the name of the former general secretary, John Boadu. I think there's the Honorable Asamoah Boateng. There's Abankwaya Abua. There are several other names, and there are all kinds of permutations which are being put forward in terms of who can do what to help the party. I'm always a firm believer in the voice of the people is the voice of God. So let's wait for the people to make a decision on who they deem fit and appropriate to be able to lead this party in this absolutely very difficult moment in the evolution of the party's existence. And I think it's absolutely important that all of us who are members of the party are humble enough to concede that the party is in a very critical, difficult state, which requires that in all our permutations and calculations, self-interest, personal ambitions, and the rest should all become subservient or secondary to the overarching goal, as it should be, of who are the people required to be able to take the party to cross the Rubicon, this critical phase of the party's life. That should be the overarching consideration. I think that is how the party should approach this matter.
You, yourself, Honorable Samuel Abu Jinapo, where do you fit in this architecture? Do you think that you have a role to play in the future of the party? I'm not talking about government, I'm not talking about parliament. Party as in party.
Oh yeah, it's a very good question, interesting question. Well, first of all, my belief always, you know, I think it's not easy to hold that belief. It's not easy to walk that talk, Kwesi. It's not easy. But the truth is that you cannot be configured as a politician as one who survives only in government. I think if you are that kind of political animal, then you are in the wrong profession, where your personal configuration is that the party will be in government all the time. It doesn't work like that. The party will be in government sometimes. The party will be in opposition as the MPP is in opposition. And if you're a politician worth your salt, when the party is in opposition, you contribute your quota to the forward march of the party. And really, that is what I very humbly consider my role to be, which is to contribute to the forward march of the party in any form or shape. And as I sit, from where I sit, I think fundamentally or principally, I should be contributing to the forward march of the party. One, from Parliament, because I'm a member of Parliament, a member of a very a caucus which has a very big task, if I'll put it that way, you know, given the numbers we have in Parliament. It means that the responsibility bestowed on us is a very huge one. So I have to contribute to the caucus in Parliament, and then I have to contribute to the party in my constituency and in my region. I think these are the two principal platforms from which I believe I can contribute to the forward march of the MPP.
I was going to ask a difficult question, but I'll save that for another time. I'll save that for another time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But where is our friend, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo? Where is our friend? Where is he in terms of, you know, geography and also in terms of political placement now?
Well, he's around like any one of us. Two-term president. Never gets better than that, as you know, Kwesi. Two-term president is a huge honor, big honor. Not many politicians get that. First of all, to be president is such a big honor, and he had the rare privilege and honor to have been voted into office as president by his compatriots. I think that is a great honor, and he served 2 terms. As you know, for example, in America, with the exception of President Reagan, since President Reagan's time, every president is served 2 terms and handed over to the opposing party. It's only Reagan who was able to hand over to Bush in 1988. Other than that, every president is done 2 terms and handed over to a different political party. It just seems almost impossible to break the 8. It looks like it anywhere in the world, you know. We made the attempt, we failed, and that is what it is. But he's been 2-term president. In Ghana, all our presidents have had 2 terms. President Mahama is now serving his 2nd term. And so my point is that, yes, it's disappointing that the results did not come the way we expected. And even more disappointing, the scale of the defeat will be heartbreaking for any politician. I believe it's heartbreaking for himself as well. But fundamentally, my view is that President Akufo-Addo is done his bit. He served his country as president for 2 terms. Did the president do well or not? What is his legacy? I can go on and on and on and on about what he did in education, in this, in that, and come to the firm conclusion that he performed creditably well. Some other person will say otherwise. But what is also true, and what any student of history will attest to, is that the legacy can never, the jury can never make the determination now. That will be further down the road. And it's a subject that I'm very interested in. You know, so many examples. President Truman of America, who led the American people into the Korean War, his approval rating was in the 20s before he left. Today, the ratings in America is different. President Bush, when he was leaving, his approval rating was less than 20. Today, it's a different matter altogether. Churchill himself was voted out in 1945. Clement Attlee defeated him, and so on and so forth. Here in our country, Ghana, you know, the view people took of presidents when they were leaving. President Kufuor is an example. I believe the jury is even out already making a determination today. People's views about President Kufuor's stewardship is much, much, much higher than the time he was leaving office. For me, the biggest example of the fact that you cannot determine a president or a politician's legacy just after he's left office or in the moment of it. The biggest example is President Mahama. In 2016, Kwesi, if anybody has said to you that President Mahama will be re-elected with 56% or so of the popular vote as at 2017, I'm sure you will tell the person will say, go and tell this to the Marines. Nobody will believe you. And yet, 8 years down the road, here he is. So I don't think, I think President Akufo-Addo is in a very good place, in my view. And I believe that eventually history will be very kind to him.
Viewers, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we are going to go into an area of controversy. Area of controversy around the formulation aura and so on. You know, I mean, Ofori-Atta, for example, has been declared a wanted man and so on. What is happening? what is the attitude of somebody like the Honorable Former Minister Samuel Abu Jinapor to all of the happenings?
You're right to say that it's a very difficult job, extremely difficult, complicated. Galamsey alone will give you all the sleepless nights and so on and so forth. So yes, it was a difficult job, but I held my own. I took counsel from several people, I should say, including yourself, and well, you know, navigated through it for the 4 years. And I'm very thankful to God, and I feel very fortunate that I went through it largely unscathed. How did I perform? I believe the jury is still out there. I shouldn't mark myself.
Well, you can mark yourself. I mean, Galamsey was an issue.
Big one.
By the time you came into office, it was there. And you left office, and the problem was still there.
Indeed.
How come?
Well, that's a very good question. We did our very best, I should say, beginning with the consultative dialogue, all through to Operation Halt and to the reforms we put in place, and the successes we chalked in the large-scale mining sector, for example, where today Ghana is the leading producer of gold by far in Africa, and we've hit 6 million ounces of gold. But you still have this problem, this very age-old, complicated problem of Galamsey, which for me, I believe, is really the real driver of Galamsey is the question of money. I mean, the subject matter of Galamsey, the central issue that drives illegal small-scale mining is gold, and gold is money, and the price of gold is now out of the roof, and so the quest to secure this mineral at all costs is insatiable, and it's difficult to clamp down. Very complicated. You have the traditional authorities angle, you have local political leadership, you have law enforcement difficulties and challenges, you have the political dimension. I mean, today, for example, you have a change of government, and you have political party apparatus who believe that, look, once there's a change of government, it's our turn or right to mine, and so on and so forth. We did our very best. We did not eliminate illegal small-scale mining. I think it's absolutely important that we concede on that. A lot of progress, some progress was made, some interventions were put in place, measures were put in place, some sources were chalked. It's work in progress. I think the new minister who's been appointed, Honorable Kofi Amabua, is somebody I know quite well and I respect very highly. He himself has been Minister for Energy before. He's been in Parliament for a while. He's been around. And I believe he can take it from there. And with all of us, our support, and with a national mindset, collective effort, we should be able to get somewhere with it. Look, Kwesi is not a Ghanaian phenomenon. Always remember that. Look, in South Africa, they call it Zamazama. It's a big problem. The people are, in fact, police officers are killed periodically because of Zamazama in South Africa, illegal small-scale mining. Even in Australia, you know, they have issues of illegal small-scale mining. But as a country, I believe the threat of illegal small-scale mining to our very survival is so huge that it requires all of us, our collective efforts. And I continue to cheer the new minister on, and whatever we can all do to help him, we will do so.
Do you think that we can solve the problem?
Yes, I think we can. I think what we need to do is to be able to contain it. I believe what worries the everyday Ghanaian is when it is out of hand, and when people are mining on in the forest reserves, on the river bodies, mining indiscriminately and mining in communities and so on and so forth, and destroying the landscape of our country. That is what occasions that much revolt, understandably so. And so we should be, I mean, Galamsey is a crime. You can't eliminate crime, but it should be, we should get to a position where it is contained, if you want.
What are some of the measures that we can take in order to at least contain it?
I believe that we have to continue to pursue the two-pronged approach of law enforcement and also building a workable, sustainable, lawful, small-scale mining. You know, this is quite unpopular to say, and I'm not too sure I should be saying this now, but it is just not possible to prevent people from going into that industry. It's almost as though it's spiritual, if you want.
You have used so just before.
Yeah, we've done all kinds of things. We've burnt excavators, we've decommissioned excavators, and we've done all kinds of, put in place all kinds of draconian measures. And yet people have persisted. And that is why I believe, alongside the law enforcement measures, it's also the necessity to have some the industry that is regulated, that is sustainable, that has regard for the sanctity of the environment, the landscape, and so on and so forth. So that can be an alternative to illegal small-scale mining.
Unfortunately, I mean, you are in a very difficult ministry, and the question of lands also came under your supervision. What about all these allegations of land grab and so on? Is there some substance to it?
Well, I think the issue of land administration was a major issue. It's always been a major issue, and I think there's a big historical antecedent to it. As you know, more than perhaps I do, Kwesi, Mensa Saba and Co. and the Aborigines Right Protection Society and the Crown Bills Act, which they defeated as far back as 1876 or so, which meant that unlike East African countries, like Zimbabwe, Kenya, and the rest, Ghanaian lands are largely stool, skin, clan, family owned. And state lands are just about 10% of the lands we have in Ghana. And so in other jurisdictions where the crown was able to appropriate the lands to the crown, you then have most of the lands in those countries being public lands, so 90% of them being public lands. Ghana is the reverse. If you go to Ashanti region, for example, only 10% of the lands in Ashanti region belongs to the state. 90% belongs to the golden stool. And it is the case in many parts of the country, including families and clans. So administering such lands tends to be very difficult. You have a family that sells to another person, multiple sales, you have a problem. So you have the difficulty or the issue of land administration as it relates to lands in Ghana generally. That's one bit of it. Then you have the second bit, which is the management of public lands, which is where there's been a lot of hue and cry about the sale of public lands and the rest. We put in place quite some measures, which I believe helped in the effective management and preservation of the public lands of our country. I mean, for example, we took the position that no public land should be alienated or sold without the express approval of the president acting through his minister for lands. And by and large, I think that really worked. It worked for us to contain the dissipation of the public lands of our country, as we should do. The politics of it is another matter. I don't even want to get into that now, which is whenever you have an election cycle, selling public land, selling Ghana land, and that. It's become a political whip or a political cane, which opposition parties have used election after election. Are there situations where officials have colluded and mismanaged public lands in some instances? I wouldn't say no. When we find that out, should we deal with those people? I would say yes.
There's a recent case of a member of parliament who appears before the vetting committee. It's actually saying that, if you attend meetings of the lands committee, you are rewarded with state lands. I'm sure you heard it.
I did, of course. Well,
how is that?
Well, there've been all kinds of arrangements in the past. I mean, I've not pretended over any such allocation of land. I haven't done that. I mean, we have multiple scenarios. You know about where the foreign ministry is today, the office of the foreign ministry, which was allocated to some public officers and so on and so forth. Interestingly, the foreign minister at the time, President Akufo-Addo, declined an offer of the nature. I don't believe that a public officer should, a public officer who has direct or indirect control over the management of public lands should have anything to do with public lands. I mean, that's a personal view I take. But if it's the practice or the convention over the years that some category of public officers are entitled to public land, as a country, we can examine that kind of practice and take a decision on it. But we can do so when we depoliticize the conversation.
You would remember that I personally called you to congratulate you when you issued the directives on access to public lands.
Indeed, you did.
But it appears that it didn't work.
Well.
The evidence now in front of us shows that it didn't work. Nobody took the directive serious.
Well, you know, the point about these things, and I keep making that point, is that let's have specific case we can deal with, and I think that is really what we should, where our attention should be, where the focus should be, that we should have specific cases that we can deal with. The whole policy and that whole space is one that perhaps we should have a conversation about. I would say that it's about time. Just before the elections, the noise was too much to have that kind of conversation. You will be drowned out. The noise will drown you out. I'm not even sure that now we can have that conversation. The environment or the atmosphere permits it. But the fundamental question, Kwesi, is that what has been the policy when it comes to the management of the public lands of our country? And I'll tell you what the policy is. As far back as 1995 was when the Rawlings administration came out with the Accra redevelopment policy. And the crux of that policy, the foundation of that policy, was that you had prime lands in Accra in particular, and other parts of Ghana like Kumasi, Takoradi, and the rest, where you had colonial bungalows or you had all kinds of buildings on them. And therefore, the state was not deriving full benefit of the use of these lands. So you have a bungalow that is occupying, say, a 3-4 acre land in the primest part of Accra. When if you leverage that particular land, you could get, say, 20 bungalows, you know. And therefore, that policy was birthed as far back as 1995. And this is the policy that has been the basis for the management of public lands in Ghana. And I think it's absolutely important that we call a spade and just confront the policy as it is, so we can jettison it or reform it or maintain it or what have you. Now, along the line, you then had the concept of PPP, which is public-private partnership, where you had a situation where the state goes into partnership with private entities. And there also the rationale or the basis, the genesis of that arrangement is that the state did not have the financial wherewithal to develop these lands. So the state has 4 acres with a little tiny colonial bungalow on it. They come and knock on Kwesi Pratt Enterprise or what have you, or Company Limited. They say, come and invest so much into building 20 townhouses on this parcel of land. Give us 10, you have 10. Then we have transition from there, metamorphosized from there, to where you then have questions of value for money, which is what is the value of the land, how many properties are being built, how many are the state getting them. Then you got into the 4th phase of where even public institutions, and I don't want to give examples, public institutions or state agencies, then on their own volition, went into these kinds of PPP arrangements. And then you had even a much more difficult problem of value for money. So if you have whatever institution in Ghana that has land for use, then invite a private entity to partner them to develop the land. And so then finally, you then also had a problem where the constitution is very express. The constitution says that all the public lands are vested in the president to be held in trust for the people. Now, you have a state institution that has been granted public land for their use. And properly so-called or legally speaking, they don't have title to the land. At all material time, the title is vested in the president. And the question then is that public institution entitled within the confines of the constitution to get into such PPP arrangement without the consent of the president? So these are all the difficult, complicated nuances or tentacles of this policy, which got me to come up with this policy directive, which first of all said, 1, no public institution is entitled to go into a PPP arrangement with any private entity to leverage on public lands without the approval of the minister or the president. 2 also was that the Lands Commission could not alienate or sell lands without the approval of the president. But the whole area, policy area of redevelopment and public-private partnerships as it relates to the use of public land and so on and so forth, it's a conversation we have to have. But that is the policy. But of course, when elections are closed, you have it branded as a government issue, the government is selling lands and all that. That one is a politics. But if we want to have a hard look at the policies and come to a conclusion as to how we can better manage the public lands of our country. I believe in all humility and modesty that as Minister for Lands, we did a great deal of work in reforming the Lands Commission, in terms of digitizing the records of the Lands Commission, in terms of these policy directives we give. But there is still a lot more work to be done. And I believe Minister Amabua will move on from there.
What about the situation where persons who claimed to be original owners of lands in places like the Roman Range and so on went on a rampage? Like a case in point, the destruction of part of the Nigerian High Commission and so on.
Indeed, the Bulgarian embassy.
What is the problem?
Well, this is a problem. It's not just that. You know, it's bigger than that, Kwesi. The whole of cantonments today, the traditional authorities laying claim to almost the whole of cantonment, where the U.S. embassy is, where the French embassy is, where very prominent historical foreign buildings are situated and so on and so forth. And in fact, there's even a claim that they've got judgment from the Supreme Court and all of that. And then the whole challenge or issue of allodial interests, as you rightly alluded to, and all of that. And of course, I mean, I think Article 25 of the Constitution, where if the state does not use land acquired for the intended purposes, the land should be, the allodial owner should be given a right of first refusal. Whilst you even just oppose that also to Okujeto Ablakwa versus Obichebilamte, where the Supreme Court held that if the land is not used for the originally intended purpose, but is used for another purpose, which is in the public interest, it says, you know, all of these. So I believe that we need to have a proper dialogue, a proper conversation along the lines of allodial title owners. And sometimes, if I'm allowed to be blunt, you have some allodial title owners who dissipate all their lands or exhaust their lands, and then they are looking for other backroom channels to disturb accrued rights or accrued interest in those lands and so on and so forth. So it's a major issue. I mean, something that we were confronted with, and I believe there were discussions about even taking the matter up in the courts and so on and so forth. But it's a big issue.
Before we move on, I mean, Achimota Forest, the only forest reserve in Accra. And there have been all kinds of stories about Achimota Forest. What do you think should happen to Achimota Forest? Should we leave it as it is? Should we allow developers to get in there? What is your view on Achimota Forest as the only carbon sink in Accra? Well,
you know, here we are. Mr. Pratt is busily reminding me of my sleepless nights. I'm now a former minister, you know, hopefully beginning to enjoy my peace and quiet. Achimota Forest now is the headache of Mr. Amabua, Minister Amabua. Yet you want to remind me of my of my sleepless nights. You know, the first point I like to make is that Achimota Forest is also another classic issue of this allodial title owners, you know, allodial title holders, the old family. And this is a matter which is traveled from President Akufo's time. And you recall that as minister, when it became a big issue, I issued almost a 24-paragraph statement which chronicled the antecedents of the old family vis-a-vis Achimota Forest, how the matter traveled from President Akufo's time through President Mills to President Mahama, and then President Akufo-Addo, and the various committees which were set up, the technical committees and the work they did, the negotiations which took place. So that is a matter of public knowledge. So that's point number one. Point number two is that I also, very carefully, and I believe in all modesty, skillfully, structured the EI with the advice of the Attorney General in a manner that suggested that the old family or their or third parties could not take possession of any parcel of land in Achimota Forest without an ecological integrity test by the Forestry Commission, by the Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority, LUSPA, by the relevant assembly, and so on and so forth. And that is written in black and white. So therefore, even though the land was granted to the family, these stopgap measures were put in place in order to protect the remaining part of the forest reserve. then thirdly and finally, it's also the question we have to ask ourselves. You know, the forest as it stands today, we need to continue with the work which began and which got us to spend some good amount of money, sums of money, to try and revegetate the forest. And the question whether or not it is indeed a carbon sink and the encroachments and the peripheral portions of the forest and all of that is the third phase of the work which has to continue and make it a forest reserve, a carbon sink, properly so-called, like Hyde Park, like Central Park, like several other parks you are very much aware of. But that is where we got to. Not a square meter of land was handed over or was taken possession of before I left office. The matter is very much in the handing over notes I presented to the new minister, and I believe the minister will take it from there.
Now, Honorable, Ora, what do you make of it? Operation Ora, Operation Return All the Loot or something like that. Yeah. What do you make of it?
Well, you know, I have had the occasion to express my views on this body when the reports of the appointments committee on the nomination of my very good friend, the Honorable Okujeto Ablakwa, as Minister for Foreign Affairs, came before the floor of Parliament. And for the records, the minister is a very good friend of mine whom we have very strong mutual respect for each other and so on and so forth, you know. Now, my fundamental problem with oral, Kwesi, is that we are always to be careful the precedent we set as a nation, as a democracy. And indeed, I have held this view not just today, not because MPP is in opposition. Those who are familiar with the positions and views I took even when MPP was in government, of course, not publicly, will attest to this fact. And they are leading members of the NDC who attest to this fact, who attest to the views I'm espousing today, which is that when we have a democracy which works, which respects the rights of individual rights of citizens, which is anchored on the principle of rule of law, innocent until proven guilty, and so on. It is good for all of us. And that is what many of you have fought for, have paid so many prices for all these years. It is because you fundamentally believe, and I subscribe to that, that a democracy which is anchored on the rule of law, which is anchored on the respect for individual liberties and rights and so on and so forth, it works for all of us. When NDC is not in office tomorrow, which is bound to happen, like they will be out of office one day, and people are being held to account, or people are being called upon to account for their stewardship, it is done within the framework or the confines of the rule of law. I think it's absolutely important. Now, the problem I have with oral, is that we have state institutions mandated and responsible for holding all manner of persons accountable. And even when those state institutions, some of them constitutional bodies, take up that mandate, they are required to do so within the four corners of the law, of the rule of law. And therefore, if one were to ask, what creature, what legal creature is oral? I'm not too sure you'll be able to give an answer to it. Then what creature? Is he a creature of statute, of an act of parliament? Is he a creature of the constitution? Is he a creature by an executive instrument by the president? Is it a commission of inquiry? What is it? You are unable to tell what legal creature it is. Of course, a response was given that this was to, hold a vacuum or the gap for people to bring information. But the government was going to be inaugurated anyway. So why not wait for the government to be inaugurated as it's been inaugurated today, so that legally sanctioned state institutions can pursue the path of accountability as they should. It's important. I recall, and I heard that from you, that you can't come into government and leave as though you checked into a hotel and checked out. That is correct. I can't be a minister for 4 years and expect that I've left the ministry as though I checked into a hotel, and when I left the hotel, I just checked out, paid my bills, and left. No. If you've done something wrong, when you are given the opportunity to serve, you should definitely be held accountable, but done in a manner that is in accordance with due process. And when we do that, we do so for all of us. We do so for all citizens of the country. Finally, on oral. Now, again, I made that point on the floor of Parliament, which is that the way they also went about their work, as much as I have quarrels or difficulties with the legal mandate of that entity itself, even the approach was one which created the impression out there of guilt even before the persons involved are heard. And that is just a triple no. The fundamental principle of administering justice, of holding people accountable, that is so fundamental, is that you have to hear the other side. I take the view that Mr. Pratt did this and did that. At the very least, I should pick a phone and call Mr. Pratt. Mr. Pratt, I'm told, or I've come to the conclusion that you've done A, B, C, D. What do you have to say about that? It is only after you've put up a response or a defense, which is what the lawyers call the odi alteram partem principle, the principle of natural justice. And he said that it's so fundamental that even when God wanted to punish Adam, God gave Adam the right of hearing. He asked him, why did you eat a forbidden apple? And Adam gave a response, a defense, before he pronounced judgment on him. So today,
Adam was very bad at answering God's questions.
That's up to him. no wonder he was condemned. Kwesi, no, but the point is not so much about the guilt or otherwise of Adam, but the point is about the need to give the person a hearing. Even in our traditional setting, they say, well, before you slaughter the fowl, you give the fowl water to drink before you slaughter it. It's all part of that. So the way they went about it, and people's, personal properties, and in many cases, even private individuals, and so on and so on. So I don't know. Let's see what the Attorney General will make out of their report.
Yeah, but the point about the kind of creature that oral is, I mean, any group of citizens can investigate anything.
Yes, of course. Why not?
So it doesn't have to be a creature of the Constitution.
No, sure.
It doesn't have to be a creature of the government or president.
But in this case, it was a creature of the president-elect. That's the difference.
As a citizen.
No, he acted as president-elect. He constituted a body and he's received their report yesterday as president. Is
there anything which prevents a president-elect from investigating or beginning the process of investigating wrongdoing? No, the president-elect is also a citizen.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But he did not act as a citizen. He acted as president-elect, and which is why he's received the report as president. Yes, and also the matters of good governance principles and tidiness and all of that. Accountability, there should be. Nobody can quarrel with that. Nobody, Kwesi. Nobody. I don't think that there should be any politician who stands against accountability. It's a politician who should be condemned, on certain terms. President Mohammed's government and the institutions associated with his government and the state should hold all manner of persons accountable. Not just former MPP appointees, even people he's appointed today. If they misconduct themselves, they have to be held accountable. Abu Gapele was held accountable under President Mahama, under his government. His own appointee and so on and so forth. There are people who were held accountable under President Akufo-Addo's government. So it's just the approach. It's just the approach. I mean, I just think that, it was a bit untidy. You have my good friend, a black guy in his cape with cameras following him.
The cap is also important.
I'm very happy. And I am very happy and excited, and somehow I think it's good tidings that he's handed over this report, and he's going to have to go and deal with his foreign ministry work and all of that. The chief diplomat of our country now, more or less, quote unquote, alleged to be harassing citizens. No. It's
I've heard the minority leader make a statement to the effect that what affects one affects all in relation to these investigations. What's your reaction to that?
Well, if people...
I would have thought that issues of corruption, accountability, and so on is at the individual level.
Well, if people are taken through due process, and by that I want to emphasize due legal process, that shouldn't be all of us our issue.
Yeah.
No, that should never be all of us. I don't, and I'm not sure that that's what the minority leader meant. I want to believe the minority leader meant if people are subjected to a process which is unlawful, which is not in accord with the rule of law, is not is kangaroo in nature, then the minority has a responsibility to rise up to the defense of the person, as you do, as any citizen at all should do. But if people are taken to due process in accordance with the laws of our country, that obviously should be for the person to answer.
We woke up one morning this week to hear that the house of Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta had been raided by persons purporting to be security personnel. What's your view?
Well, my view is very simple. Let's build a society which works for everybody, Kwesi. Let's build a society which works for Mr. Pratt, which works for Mr. Jinapo, which works for everybody. Which, if there is suspicion that any one of us have done anything wrong, we are taken to due process and our rights are respected and the law is applied justly and fairly. It is good for all of us to do that, because if it's on one foot, not too long ago, I know my friends in the NDC were very much up in arms about quote-unquote persecution. To what extent that is correct, I wouldn't comment on that here. But it is just in all of us our interest that we build a society and a democracy which is anchored on the rule of law, and that works for everybody. I mean, that's all I would say. If there's anybody who is suspected to have committed a crime, that person should be taken through the due process of the law, and no abuse of rights and so on and so forth. I mean, that's all I would say.
The Office of Special Prosecutor has declared you a wanted man. You're a lawyer. Your views as a lawyer. Forget your politics. You are a lawyer.
Well, I'm not particularly familiar with the enabling law of the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Neither am I familiar with their LI. I was very much involved as Deputy Chief of Staff in the establishment of that office. I was actively involved. I was one of the leading officers who worked with the Chief of Staff and the President to establish that office. But as a general legal principle and rule, and I'm happy you've asked me to speak as a lawyer here, as a general principle of law, I do know that matters of bench warrants, search warrants, and the rest are normally at the behest of the court. But that said, let me be quick in emphasizing on the caveat that I've not looked at the statute, the LI, and the enabling law of the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and whether or not the law vests such powers in that office. And Dr. Rollins herself believes that it cannot be me. I'm very grateful to her for that.
Are you leaving it here?
No, for the time being. I'm happy that you've given me the opportunity to speak on this matter on your show, because I know it's widely watched and listened to. And I can only continue to assure the public that it's not me, and it just cannot be me. I don't speak like that, Kwesi.
Finally. Under what circumstances did you arrange special accommodation for Mr. Rollins?
I'm not arranging a special accommodation for him.
You deny that?
Yes, I deny it vehemently.
But you know that at a certain stage, he was living in, what is that place called? West Legon.
President Rollins is a Ghanaian statesman. He was the first president of the Fourth Republic. We are all actors within on this stage of the Fourth Republic, principally because of his contribution to Ghanaian democracy and so on and so forth. Let's continue to celebrate him as our statesman, as we should do for others as well.
Honorable, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And we hope that you be coming a lot more.
I will indeed.
I have really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, there was a see when you break a kind of I'm here doing something in Abanavi. Subscribe to channel, like in a shade you might do no Afofro and coming.
PENDREAM TV now so far so good. Say open online portal e wo Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.